Rain moved over Coruscant in black sheets, hard enough to blur the city into a thing half forged from light and half dissolved into cloud. From the high gallery of the Jedi Temple, Mace Windu watched lightning drag its pale claws across the lower sky, and thought, not for the first time, that the capital no longer looked like the heart of a civilization. It looked like the inside of a machine that had been left running too long. The city never slept. It pulsed and murmured and flared through every hour of darkness, traffic ribbons braided through the air, towers burning gold and white and venom green, private craft moving like insects between ministries and pleasure districts and military docks. Even here at the summit of ancient stone built long before the Republic learned to crown its power in Durasteel, he could hear the distant churn of millions of lives being spent. Coruscant did not believe in silence. It believed in consumption. Behind him, the temple was quieter than the city, but not quiet. There was no quiet now, not with the war spread across too many systems to name. Not with masters gone to the fronts and Padawans walking the halls with the pinched faces of old men. Not with clone officers at the lower gates and military couriers in the antechambers and holos of casualties flickering in chambers once reserved for philosophy. The Jedi had become necessary to war, and necessity was one of the oldest masks corruption wore. He rested both hands behind his back and let his gaze settle on the Senate District, a cluster of stately towers and bridges and ceremonial domes glowing through the rain. Somewhere in that light, a session was still underway. Emergency appropriations, security revisions, authority transfers. Another measure, another concession. Another handful of power drawn from frightened beings and laid in the hands of one man because he had once seemed calm while the galaxy burned. Mace had met rulers his entire life. He knew how fear moved through them. He knew how men could come to believe that, because they had preserved order once, they alone were fit to define it forever. But Sheev Palpatine did not move like other rulers. The Chancellor radiated kindness with the same ease some beings radiated heat. His smile was a shelter. His voice made compromise sound like comfort. Even his ambition had the shape of patience. Nothing in the man was hurried, not outwardly. Nothing coarse. Yet the closer the Republic drifted toward dependence upon him, the heavier the force seemed to grow around the Senate. Footsteps approached behind him, measured and soft. He did not turn immediately. He knew the rhythm. "Still at the window," Shakti said. "Still raining." "It's Coruscant," she replied. "It rains when the city remembers what sky is." That almost drew a smile from him. Almost. He turned then. Shakti stood at the threshold of the gallery in travel-worn robes, Leku beaded with moisture from the outer corridors, a narrow data cylinder cradled in one hand. Her face bore the stillness she wore into battle, but there was strain under it tonight. The kind that revealed itself not in expression, but in how a person held her shoulders when they thought no one was studying them. "You returned from Kamino early," Mace said. "I returned because this would not wait." She crossed to him. The lamps along the gallery burned low, turned amber by stormlight, and made the lines of her face look carved rather than born. She offered the cylinder. He took it without activating it. "What is it?" "A fragment," she said. "Or the remains of one." Medical indexing from the Tup Inquiry, and from ARC Trooper 5's follow-up examinations before he escaped custody. There were archived references to a neural implant line that no longer exists in the primary Kaminoan files. Macy's gaze lifted from the cylinder to her eyes. No longer exists? Removed, or hidden so deeply that even the Kaminoans decided ignorance was safer than honesty. She paused. The deletion trail did not begin on Kamino. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the eastern platforms. For a moment, the gallery flashed blue-white, and the city below became a negative of itself, all edges and hunger. "Where did it begin?" he asked. Shakti looked toward the Senate District. He said nothing. He had long ago learned that silence made truth easier for others to set down between them. The inquiry path was overridden from Corasont, she said at last. Through a classification seal attached to the executive security apparatus. The request chain touched military intelligence, the Republic Medical Bureau, and the Office of the Supreme Chancellor. Nuggy. The cylinder felt suddenly colder in his hand. When? The first irregularity followed Tup's death. The second came after Fives was killed. Mace looked away from her and back into the storm. In his mind, he saw Fives as he had appeared in the reports. Desperate, armed, fraying, insisting he had uncovered a conspiracy no one was willing to name. He remembered how quickly the matter had been wrapped in language neat enough to become forgettable. Battle stress. Instability. A lone clone driven mad by pressure. Necessary tragedy. Move on. There had been too much war, too much loss, too many crises stacked atop one another for any single death to retain its full weight, unless a Jedi insisted on carrying it. Why bring this to me now? He asked. Because I believed, until tonight, that it might still be bureaucracy protecting itself. That a frightened official erased something dangerous without understanding it. Kamino hides its mistakes. Corasont buries its embarrassments. I could have accepted that. She took a breath. Then I found a security note attached to the override. It named a follow-up meeting at the Chancellor's office. Mace turned fully toward her. Fives was taken to Palpatine, he said. Yes. And the records related to his implant inquiry were then suppressed through channels tied to the same office. Yes. Shakti's voice never rose. That was part of why Mace trusted her. Alarm shouted, could be performance. Alarm spoken softly had already passed through judgment. He thumbed the cylinder awake. A blue hollow grid sprang into the rain-hazed air between them, lines of medical notation fractured where the archive had been stripped. Here and there details survived. Cranial imaging, inhibitor response, anomalous trauma readings, coded references to behavioral compliance. Most of it was technical. All of it carried the chill of something designed far from compassion. What did the Kaminoans say? He asked. Nalasu said the matter was closed. Prime Minister Lamassu said there was nothing in the clones beyond standard enhancement architecture. Both of them lied. Nagare, Captain Kai. You are certain. I trained alongside those soldiers from their first unsteady steps, Shakti said. I watched Kamino grow them. I watched them learn names for themselves in a place built to number them. I know what fear looks like in a Kaminoan, and tonight I saw it. Mace dismissed the hollow. Rain hissed against the gallery stones. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Below, somewhere in the deeper levels of the temple, a bell sounded once, low and resonant. Shift change at the medical wing, perhaps. Or a summons for some exhausted knight just returned from the front. He remembered the temple before Geonosis, before mass armies and emergency powers and casualty projections. He remembered novices arguing over ethics in the refectories, initiates racing one another beneath the arches, masters spending entire afternoons in patient disagreement over philosophy. He had once believed the Jedi could be bent by politics without breaking. War had taught him that institutions rarely broke all at once. They bent and bent and bent, until one day everyone called the new shape inevitable. Every trail returns to the same place, he murmured. Shakti folded her hands inside her sleeves. Sifo Dias, Dooku. Kamino arrest from the archives. An army ordered in secret. A clone who dies raving that something is buried in his mind. A chancellor who accumulates power with every disaster. We keep meeting the same pattern wearing different names. Mace thought of Geonosis, of Count Dooku, standing in a cavern of red stone and telling Obi-Wan Kenobi that a Sith Lord had influence over the Senate. At the time, it had sounded like the kind of truth false men used because the shape of truth made the lie easier to swallow. Dooku was a traitor. Dooku was an aristocrat with a grievance and a gift for corruption. Dooku served darkness. Why would darkness not lie? Because truth, Mace thought, was often the cruelest bait. Tell no one outside the council, he said. Shakti's expression did not change, but some thin wire of tension in her neck eased. I already limited the retrieval logs. Only Jocasta Nu knows I removed the fragment. Mna, Padmé, Diah. Ignorana, Widerra. Good. Do you think the Chancellor is involved? Mace returned his gaze to the skyline. The Senate Tower shone through the weather like a polished blade. Involved, he said slowly, is no longer the word that worries me. He felt it then, not as a vision and not as certainty but as pressure, a density in the force, a hidden weight pressing from the direction of the government quarter, not sharp enough to be identified, not crude enough to be called merely dark, but vast in the way a storm front was vast, so broad that it made smaller weather impossible to read. The Republic thought danger came from the Outer Rim, from Separatist fleets, from droid foundries and warlords and old grievances raised into banners. The Jedi had spent 3 years striking outward at the edges of the wound. What if the blade had never left the center? Meditate before you sleep, he told Shakti. And rest if you can. That sounds like an order. It's late enough to earn one. She inclined her head and withdrew, leaving him alone with the rain and the city. Mace remained by the open arch until the storm deepened and the traffic lanes grew thin. Somewhere to the west, behind veils of cloud, the military docks received another cruiser full of survivors and another hold full of dead. Somewhere below, senators convinced themselves they were preserving liberty by lending one man more power to defend it. Somewhere in the private chambers of the Capitol, a patient well unlike any he had known was either waiting or moving or smiling. Lightning broke again over Corasont, silvering the temple spires and the wet stone beneath his feet. For the first time in many years, Mace Windu found that he no longer feared what might be hidden in the dark. He feared what had learned to stand in the light and be welcomed. The Venator broke through the cloud cover in a wash of ionized blue, descending toward the military sector with the weary authority of something that had survived too often to feel triumph any longer. From the hangar deck of the Resolute, Anakin Skywalker watched Coruscant rise through the thinning mist and felt relief so sharp it was almost pain. Home was a dangerous word. He had learned that young. Tatooine had taught him that a place could own your body and still never shelter you. The temple had taught him that a place could shape your soul while denying the name your heart wanted to give it. Padmé taught him every time he held her that home might in fact be a person, and therefore the most fragile thing in the galaxy. Still, when the cruiser cut through those clouds and the capital spread beneath him in tiers of silver and light, some part of him always unclenched. The deck around him smelled of coolant, smoke, and scorched insulation. Mechanics moved around damaged fighters with the grim efficiency of beings who no longer wasted outrage on the condition in which war returned their machinery. Clones carried out the dead first and the wounded second because that was the order the living had agreed to, and because the dead did not worsen while waiting. The etiquette of slaughter had become refined over the years. Anakin hated how easy it all looked. Captain Rex stood beside a crate of munitions with his helmet under one arm, reviewing casualty feeds on a wrist display while Commander Cody conferred with a pair of deck officers. The orange and blue markings on their armor were dulled by ash. Neither man complained. Neither man had ever learned how to. Obi-Wan Kenobi emerged from the open belly of a gunship with the air of someone who had misplaced a peaceful afternoon and was politely unwilling to say so. His beard was darker with soot than with age, his robe singed at one sleeve, his expression deceptively mild. Anakin could tell from the set of his mouth that he was thinking hard enough to be annoyed. "You're making that face again," Anakin said as Obi-Wan reached him. What face? The one that says the galaxy has chosen incompetence at precisely the wrong moment. Obi-Wan accepted a canteen from a passing trooper, drank, and handed it back. "That narrows it down very little," Anakin snorted. "So it's bad." "It's interesting," Obi-Wan said, which in his vocabulary usually meant bad, complicated, or politically inconvenient in a way likely to become personal. Rex approached and snapped a brief salute that Obi-Wan ignored with familiar ease. "General, we stabilized the captured relay core. Most of the projection matrix is slag, but there's enough to show the last transmission. Cody joined them, hands clasped behind his back. It came off the courier ship we intercepted over Forost. The crew wiped the memory stack before we boarded, but not fast enough. Anakin leaned back against the durasteel railing near the workbench as Rex activated the battered projector. It hissed, sparked, and threw a flickering blue image into the air. Static crawled through the hologram like insects in a field of light. The figure at its center wore a hood dense enough to hide the face entirely. Only hands appeared clearly, pale and almost delicate, folded within the sleeves. The voice was fragmented but intelligible in pieces. The timetable remains. No deviation. The Senate security measure must pass before the inquiry is allowed. Kamino will be contained. Our ally within the Republic assures me. The recording shredded into harsh noise and died. For a while, only the hangar sounds filled the space between them. Tools striking metal, repulsor lifts whining, medics calling for stretchers. Anakin folded his arms. That's not much. It's more than we had yesterday, Obi-Wan said. It could mean anything, Anakin replied. A minister, a senator, some clerk selling schedules to the Separatists. Possibly. Anakin knew that tone. You don't think that? Obi-Wan glanced once toward the clones before looking back at him. The courier carrying that core launched from a Commerce Guild relay with diplomatic shielding, and it was escorted by droid fighters right up until we cut them down. That suggests value. The message references Kamino, a Senate measure, and an inquiry somebody wants delayed. Those are not the concerns of a random clerk. Cody spoke without inflection. The escort captain died before we reached him, but the nav path in the courier's astromech log shows previous stops near Obadiah and Scipio. Finance worlds. Syndicate routes. Places where wars were fed by numbers first and bodies later. Rex deactivated the projector. There's something else. One of the surviving signal tags in the transmission matrix corresponds to a relay band reserved for executive government traffic. Anakin straightened. Reserved, Obi-Wan repeated. Does not mean exclusive. It means protected. But somebody high enough to use it is talking to the Separatists, Anakin said. Obi-Wan's gaze rested on the dead projector as though it had personally offended him. Or somebody high enough to authorize its misuse. Anakin looked out through the open hangar mouth toward the towers beyond the military docks. The capital shone in the rain like a jeweled predator. Somewhere in that monstrous brilliance, Padmé would be moving through her day beneath the weight of senatorial silk and political masks. Somewhere else, the Chancellor would be hearing debriefs and war updates and making sympathetic noises over losses he measured in entirely different units. A page of data flashed across Rex's display. There's already a summons from the executive office, he said. For General Skywalker, priority personal. Obi-Wan's brows rose. Anakin kept his expression neutral by habit. The Chancellor likes quick battlefield updates. He likes you, Obi-Wan said. That too. There was no accusation in it. Not precisely. But Anakin felt the old irritation spark anyway. Everyone said it differently. Some with approval, some with suspicion, some with a kind of distant regret that tried very hard not to sound like judgment. The Chancellor likes you. As though affection were a weapon he had somehow accepted carelessly. As though the galaxy were full of fatherly men in powerful offices, and Anakin had simply had the bad taste to choose the wrong one. He trusts me, Anakin said. Obi-Wan gave him a long, level look. That may be true. You sound as if it isn't. I sound, Obi-Wan replied, patient in that infuriating way of his. As if I am capable of imagining reasons a politician might cultivate the loyalty of the most famous Jedi in the war. Anakin laughed once without humor. You make it sound so calculated. Most politics are. Not everything has to be a maneuver. On Corasont? Obi-Wan asked softly. These days, almost everything is. For a moment, Anakin felt the urge to argue just for the pleasure of resisting the shape of Obi-Wan's concern. It was an old instinct between them, born partly of love and partly of the fact that Obi-Wan had been asked to be too many things in his life, and none of them had been simple. Master, Brother Darth, Commander Diah, witness, restraint. Anakin knew better than anyone how the man used calm as scaffolding. Beneath it lived exhaustion, grief, and a stubbornness so refined it passed for grace. He pushed away from the railing. If you're implying the Chancellor is behind this, say it. Obi-Wan's answer took a moment too long. I'm implying, he said at last, that I don't like finding the same door in every corridor. Cody exchanged a glance with Rex, then looked away with the diplomatic skill clones developed when generals became complicated. Anakin scrubbed a hand through damp hair. What do you want me to do? Nothing yet, Obi-Wan said. We take the relay to the Council. We see what the others think. Then perhaps you meet the Chancellor and tell me afterward whether he raises the matter of Kamino or the Senate measure, or any inquiry he should have no reason to mention. Nani? There it was. The thing hiding inside concern. Usefulness. You want me to spy on him? Obi-Wan's mouth tightened. I want you to keep your eyes open. Because I'm close enough to get answers, but not trusted enough to hear the questions. That landed. Obi-Wan rarely flinched physically, but something in his gaze shifted. I trust you, he said. Anakin looked at him and found, annoyingly, that Obi-Wan meant it. What he did not trust was the world, or institutions, or the damage fear could do to good intentions. It was never as personal as Anakin wanted it to be, and that somehow made the hurt worse. He exhaled, slow and angry and tired. Fine, I'll go. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Rex received another feed and turned his wrist display toward Cody. Dock assignment confirmed. We're clear to unload the relay core into restricted temple transport. Obi-Wan nodded. Have it sent under guard. Cody answered, Yes, General. Anakin watched the clones move to obey and felt, as he often did in their presence, a complicated tenderness edged with guilt. They were younger than they looked and older than they should have been. Each face a variation on the same man, and yet utterly distinct once you knew how to look. The Republic called them assets. The Jedi called them brothers because that felt more humane. Neither word solved the obscenity of their making. The cruiser settled fully into dock. Magnetic clamps engaged with a deep iron shudder that passed up through the soles of Anakin's boots. Obi-Wan rested a hand on his shoulder. The gesture was brief, familiar, and so unguarded that it cut through the last of Anakin's irritation. You should sleep before you see him, Obi-Wan said. I won't. No, Obi-Wan agreed. You won't. Anakin glanced sideways at him. When did you become so wise? Somewhere between your third reckless rescue and your fifth completely unnecessary apology. I don't apologize that often. You apologize beautifully. You simply reserve it for catastrophic occasions. Nay. Well, that got a real laugh out of him. For one heartbeat, the war lifted enough for them to stand together as they had once stood in less blood-soaked years. Teacher and student, brothers by ordeal, men who knew each other's flaws well enough to survive them. Then the moment passed. Corasont waited below with all its luminous hunger. As the relay core was sealed into a security carrier and taken toward the temple under clone escort, Anakin looked again toward the city and felt a shadow move across his thoughts, thin but cold. He could not have named it. It was not fear exactly. It was the sense that something patient had noticed him noticing it. The Archives never truly slept either, but unlike the city, they disguised wakefulness as reverence. Even at this hour, the great chamber held its own weather, dust drifting through shafts of filtered gold, holocrons humming faintly within their vaults, shelves and columns disappearing upward into a penumbra that made knowledge seem architectural. Jocasta Nu stood among the long banks of storage alcoves, like an elderly queen in a kingdom of memory, dry-eyed, severe, and impossible to intimidate. People say records are lost, she said, guiding Yoda and Shakti toward a sealed consultation table. That word is often used by those who benefit from not having to explain who misplaced them. Yoda's ears twitched. Irritated you are? I am always irritated when ignorance is presented as fate. The old librarian keyed open the table. Light bloomed upward. Files arranged themselves into ordered layers above the surface. Ancient conflict maps, Senate access histories, wartime procurement chains, restricted medical tags, sealed council minutes from years Mace himself had barely been old enough to attend. Yoda leaned upon his cane and studied the data without blinking. Beside him, Shakti folded her hands and let Jocasta build the argument in her own uncompromising fashion. This, Jocasta said, pointing to a recovered document from the Kamino erasure trail, is not a simple deletion. It is a path burial. Whoever obscured the record wanted future investigators to conclude that it had never existed at all. That requires more than panic. It requires design. Connected to the Chancellor's office, Shakti said. Through executive security channels, Jocasta corrected. Which could mean the Chancellor. It could also mean someone using the machinery of his office with unusual freedom. Yoda looked up. Freedom given or taken? An excellent question, Jocasta said. Here is another. She rotated the layers. A set of older files surfaced, drawn from pre-war archive fragments concerning Sith infiltration models. One holotext, written centuries before the Republic ever imagined clone armies, described the preferred operating method of dark side power when brute conquest proved impractical. Corruption of institutions, exploitation of crisis, concentration of authority beneath a popular figure, use of proxies to keep the real hand unseen. The Sith are not original, Jocasta said with a note of contempt that somehow made the observation more chilling. They are merely patient. They study fear because it is efficient. They prefer governments to invasions when governments can be taught to invade themselves. Shakti turned toward Yoda. Every campaign in this war has increased the Chancellor's emergency powers. Every attempt to end it, blocked or delayed by those who gain from its length, Jocasta added. Yoda's expression gave little away, but inside him the Force had begun to gather into a density he disliked. He had lived long enough to distrust elegant patterns. Reality rarely arranged itself into clarity for the comfort of those trying to understand it. Yet one by one the fragments had been falling toward the same center. Diah commissioned an army in secret and died. Dooku, once a Jedi, helped shape that army's origins, and then led the opposition against the Republic it served. Kamino vanished from the archive under the hand of a Jedi who had already fallen to darkness. A clone trooper discovered something buried in his mind and was brought, of all places, to the Supreme Chancellor's office before dying. Now records from that inquiry had been hidden through executive channels. And in the oldest records of all, the Sith were described not as conquerors, but as whisperers behind laws. Yoda reached out and touched the hovering medical file. More of Five's testimony, have we? Shakti nodded. Only fragments. Security logs from the military command center, partial audio from the pursuit teams, and a damaged intake note made before he escaped treatment. Jocasta selected the fragment. The table gave a small chime. A grainy audio waveform appeared, then resolved into voice. All of us, inside us, they put something in us. The Chancellor. They wanted me to kill the Jedi. The sound degraded in a wash of static. Silence followed. Shakti closed her eyes briefly. At the time, it sounded like fear making meaning out of madness. Fear does that, Jocasta said. So does truth. Yoda felt sadness move through him, not merely for the dead trooper, but for how easily the war had taught everyone to smooth the rough edges off any human cry and label what remained manageable. The clones died by the tens of thousands. One more desperate voice had not seemed enough to halt anything. That was how systems protected themselves. They converted suffering into background. He opened his eyes. What say the Kaminoans now? That the implants govern aggression control and developmental stabilization, Shakti said. that nothing in them is unusual. Yet they refuse direct access to the base architecture. And why refuse? Yoda asked. Because we no longer frighten them as much as someone else does, Jocasta said. A tremor passed through the great chamber. Not physical, not enough to disturb the dust or the lamps, but in the force itself, like distant thunder beyond a mountain range. Yoda went still. For the briefest instant, the entire room seemed to darken at the edges. He had known such shrouding before. He had felt it around Dooku after the Count's fall became irreversible. He had felt it more diffusely across the war, a curtain thickening with every campaign. Yet this touched the archives now as if someone far away had become aware that old books were being opened in the wrong order. Master, Shakti asked softly. Yoda drew in a slow breath. Strong the dark side is tonight. Jocasta's mouth flattened. It is often strong in libraries. People hate what remembers them clearly. None. He almost smiled. Almost. Leave these with me, he said, indicating the layered files. Jocasta inclined her head. I will secure the chamber. Shakti looked as though she wished to argue and then decided he had lived too long to be protected from meditation by well-meaning friends. She bowed and withdrew with the librarian, their footsteps receding into the archive hush. Alone, Yoda lowered himself onto the consultation cushion beneath the table's fading glow. The Force gathered around him like deep water. He let the surface chatter of thought fall away. War reports, casualty counts, names, suspicions, griefs too numerous for any one being to hold cleanly. Beneath them all flowed the older current, wide and cold, where truth did not come as statements but as pressures, colors, absences. He sought the living force, the pulse of beings across the city. The temple glimmered around him, tired and watchful. The Senate quarter burned with hot, restless minds, ambition braided with dread. The military docks crackled with pain. Somewhere in a private apartment, love and fear clung so tightly together they could scarcely be told apart. Somewhere else, a will hidden behind gentleness sat very still and let the galaxy move toward it. The shroud thickened. He might have mistaken the next moment for memory if he had not known better. It came as a voice not through ears, but through the old inward place where one's own deepest thoughts sometimes arrived wearing another name. At the center look. Yoda's eyes opened. He did not move. The chamber remained empty. Dust turned in the lamplight. Far away, some mechanical lift changed levels with a muted whine. Again, quieter, almost amused despite the gravity in it, not beyond the storm. Within it, Qui-Gon, not a full apparition, not even a certainty, only the unmistakable flavor of that consciousness he had once met in the in-between spaces, irreverent, compassionate, stubbornly free of institutional fear. The dead did not always speak plainly. Sometimes the living heard only what they were finally ready to hear. Yoda bowed his head. At the center, he murmured. He rose more slowly than he once would have and made his way out of the archives, cane tapping soft metronomic notes on the polished floor. In the corridor beyond, temple lamps threw long bronze pools across stone walls, carved before the Republic's current failures were imaginable. He found Mace not in the council chamber but again at the high gallery, as though some unease had fixed him there. Mace. The younger man turned. His expression sharpened when he saw Yoda's face. What is it? For a moment, Yoda looked past him at the storm-smothered city. The Senate Tower burned through the weather like a candle held inside a fist. Outward too long looked we have, Yoda said. At battle lines, at systems, at enemies wearing proper enemy faces. But if a shadow sits at the heart of the Republic, blind to the edges, that would make us. Mace studied him. You felt something. Yes. Something you can name. Yoda's mouth drew thin. Not yet. But nearer than we feared, the darkness is. Mace's gaze shifted from Yoda to the city and back again. Neither man needed to say the Chancellor's name. It stood between them anyway, polite and smiling and increasingly impossible to ignore. The Senate liked to think of itself as the voice of the Republic, but Padmé Amidala had long ago learned that it was more accurately the echo chamber in which the Republic persuaded itself that delay was wisdom. The rotunda was beautiful enough to disguise the truth. That was part of its genius. She stood in her pod during the late session and watched Sheev Palpatine speak beneath the suspended circles of light, while rain streaked the transparisteel high above. He wore fatigue gracefully, the way he wore authority, as though it had been placed upon him reluctantly by a galaxy so wounded he could not bear to refuse its need. Even now, arguing for a temporary expansion of emergency security, oversight in response to fresh bombings on several core transport routes, he managed to sound like a man apologizing for the inconvenience of power, rather than requesting more of it. He was very good. That was what frightened her. Tyrants were easier to resist when they shouted. Palpatine spoke like a physician requesting one more painful procedure before healing could begin. Senators who would have balked at a blunter demand nodded themselves into compliance while he praised their wisdom. He made surrender feel participatory. To her left, Bail Organa listened with his usual grave stillness, one hand folded across the other. He had a face made for honesty, open, intelligent, a little sad even at rest. It had made him formidable in politics because people mistook gentleness for softness until it was too late. On her right, Mon Mothma's expression remained composed enough to qualify as serene, but Padmé knew her well enough to recognize the tension in the line of her jaw. "The measure is narrower than I expected," Mon murmured without taking her eyes off the central dais. "That means he intends to widen it later," Bail said. Palpatine was thanking the Senate for its faith in him. Across the chamber, applause began in ripples and thickened into something like relief. Padmé looked around at the glowing pods full of faces lifted toward the Chancellor and felt a bleak tenderness for them. Many were cowards. More were tired. Some were opportunists. A few were fools. But most were simply afraid, and fear had a way of turning responsible beings into children, searching a crowd for the one adult who appeared certain. The session adjourned near midnight. Pods glided away from the central well one by one, their occupants already summoning aides, drafting statements, trading private assessments through secure comms. The rotunda gradually emptied until its scale felt almost mocking. Padmé rode in silence with Bail and Mon to a private residential tower in the upper districts, one of several discreet meeting places senators used when they wished to speak without the Chancellor's surveillance apparatus politely pretending not to hear. The apartment belonged, on paper, to a retired trade minister with no interest in politics and an unfortunate tendency to vacation off-world during important votes. In reality, it had become a refuge for those still trying to preserve some boundary between governance and dependency. The sitting room overlooked a swath of the Senate quarter where light washed the rain-slick air in pale gold. Fire from a low decorative hearth moved within a sculpted basin along one wall, reflected in crystal and polished stone. It was a room designed to soothe beings into candor. Tonight, candor came easily enough without architectural help. Bail set aside his cloak and moved directly to the window. "He is preparing the Senate to accept permanence." Mon crossed to the sideboard and poured 3 measures of wine. "He has been preparing us for years." Padmé accepted a glass but did not drink. "The war has given him arguments no peacetime chancellor could have imagined." "The war has given him the war," Bail said. She looked at him sharply. "You think he is prolonging it. I think every time the conflict might narrow, some new crisis restores his indispensability." Mon handed Bail his glass and took the remaining one for herself. "We have all thought it," she said. "Few are willing to say it aloud." Padmé turned toward the window. Across the city, the executive tower rose clean and pale through the weather. A monument to order. A knife made ceremonial. "The people trust him," she said. Bail's answer came gently. "That is not the defense you believe it is." "No," she admitted. "It isn't." Mon sat on the edge of a low divan, her gown rustling softly. "If we do nothing, we become complicit through patience. If we move too soon, he will paint us as destabilizing the war effort. The question is not whether he overreaches. It is whether the Senate still contains enough courage to care." Padmé thought of Naboo, of her own first seasons in office, when she had believed public virtue was sustained by visible examples of it. People had to be shown what decency looked like, and then they would protect it. It had taken only a few years in the capital to teach her how naive that was. Decency, she had learned, was not self-preserving. It exhausted easily. It preferred to assume someone else would speak first. "We should circulate a statement," she said slowly. "Not an accusation. A demand that emergency powers be set under review at fixed intervals. A legal boundary, however modest." "No. Delegations and statements," Bail murmured. "We are back to weapons of paper." "Paper cuts still bleed," Mon said. That almost broke the tension. Almost. A quiet tone sounded at the private entry panel. Padmé set down her glass at once. Bail and Mon exchanged a look. The time of night made social calls unlikely, and caution was habit now. "I'll see to it," Padmé said. Bail rose. "You won't see to it alone." She gave him a grateful look, then moved to the narrow side corridor leading to the service entry. Security recognized her before she reached the panel. The door slid open. Anakin stood beyond it in a dark cloak, damp with rain, hood lowered, face shadowed by fatigue and something rawer than fatigue. For a heartbeat, the sight of him hit her with such force that the rest of the apartment, the city, the war, all of it fell away. She had loved him long enough that reunion still arrived as a small catastrophe. He carried battle with him even when uninjured. It clung to posture, to the way his attention never fully stopped moving, to the faint scent of starship air and hot metal that no washing seemed able to remove. "Padmé," he said, and his voice softened around her name in the way it did only when no one else was meant to hear. She reached for him before thinking. He gathered her into his arms, one gloved metal hand at the small of her back, the other warm against her hair. For one suspended instant, she let herself disappear into the fact of him being alive. Then she remembered Bail and Mon in the other room and stepped back enough to breathe. "You weren't expected," she said. "I know. That has never stopped you." The shadow of a smile passed over his mouth. It vanished quickly. "May I come in?" "Of course." He entered. Bail and Mon met him in the sitting room with the careful neutrality of people who knew more than courtesy allowed them to acknowledge. Anakin bowed with rough sincerity, more soldier than diplomat tonight. "Senator Organa, Senator Mothma." "General," Bail said. Mon's eyes moved over Anakin's face and rested there a fraction longer than protocol required. She saw too much. Padmé had always suspected that if the galaxy ever burned down to two people capable of holding an honest conversation, while pretending not to, one of them would be Mon Mothma. "We were just finishing," Mon said. "You don't have to leave on my account," Anakin replied. Bail's expression suggested that was exactly why they should. "It grows late." When the door closed behind them, the apartment seemed to exhale. Padmé turned back toward Anakin. He stood near the hearth with rain-dark hair falling over his brow, his eyes brighter than the room's low firelight justified. There was tension in him that did not belong solely to battle. "You've had no sleep," she said. "Not enough. What happened?" He hesitated, which was answer enough to several different questions. "Obi-Wan and I intercepted a Separatist courier," he said. "It carried a damaged relay core. There was a message on it. Something about Kamino, a Senate measure, an ally inside the Republic." Padmé went still. "Did you show it to the Council?" "Yes. And now everyone is pretending not to think the obvious thing." He began to pace, not quickly, but with the contained velocity of a man keeping his thoughts from scattering by forcing them into his body. Padmé watched him cross the polished floor, turn, cross again. She had seen this rhythm often enough to know that intervention had to be timed carefully. "The Chancellor has asked to see me," he said. "Personal priority. You think it's connected?" "I don't know." That from him meant yes. Padmé moved closer. "Anakin, Diah." He looked at her, and whatever battle-hardened composure he had been wearing thinned just enough for her to glimpse the fear underneath. Not fear for himself, She knew that distinction well. "You've been meeting with Bail and Mon," he said. It was not really a question. Yes. To discuss Palpatine. To discuss the powers he keeps asking the Senate to prolong. He's trying to hold the Republic together. And perhaps he believes that, she said. That does not make him safe. Anakin's jaw tightened. You sound like the Council. Perhaps the Council is not wrong about everything. He laughed once, bitter and brief. That would be a new experience. She touched his arm. He stilled under her hand. This war has changed everyone, she said. It has changed him too. Power never sits unused. It changes the hand that holds it even when that hand once meant well. You liked him. I did. And now? Padmé looked past him to the window, to the distant gleam of the executive tower. Now I think he has become too comfortable being the answer to every frightened question. Anakin closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were younger somehow, stripped of command and legend and all the titles the war had piled upon him. For an instant, he was simply the man she loved, too burdened to sort loyalty from need. I'm tired, he said quietly, of not knowing who's using whom. She cupped his face. Then stop letting other people decide your conscience for you. He leaned into her palm, just slightly. It was such a small motion, and it undid her. Outside, thunder moved across Corasont. Inside, the fire along the wall made their shadows tremble against stone. Padmé kissed him, gently at first, and then with the desperation she had taught herself to hide from everyone else. When they finally parted, the war returned by increments rather than all at once, and even that mercy hurt. Stay until morning, she whispered. His smile this time was almost unbearably tender. You always know which impossible thing to ask. Morning in the executive residence arrived without softness. Rain had washed the city clean and left it looking more artificial than before, every tower sharpened into precise brilliance under a pale sky. In the private chamber adjoining his public office, Palpatine stood before a bank of tall windows and watched the transport lanes resume their usual frenzy. He liked Coruscant best just after storms. Weather made the city look briefly chastened. The effect never lasted. Mace Windu waited several paces behind him, datapad in hand, blue face carefully neutral. The Chagrian had mastered the art of appearing useful without appearing curious, which was why he had survived so long. Survival among powerful men often depended less on intelligence than on how efficiently one concealed it. The security continuity measure will clear committee by midday, Mace said. There is some resistance from the Organa block, but not enough to delay the scheduling. Good. The Military Medical Bureau is asking again for access to the Kaminoan implant architecture. Palpatine did not turn from the window. Deny them. We already have, Chancellor. Then deny them more elegantly. Mace hesitated. Master Yoda's office has requested clarification regarding the archive deletions associated with the Fives case. That did bring Palpatine's gaze sideways, not yet to the Chagrian but to the reflection of him in the glass. Mace had gone very still. Sensible. What precisely was the wording? A routine follow-up. Nothing accusatory? Yet. No? Ta. Palpatine folded his hands behind his back. The city below churned on, oblivious. He felt the Jedi moving in thought if not yet in action. Slow, conscientious, tangled in their own ethics. He had relied upon that for years. The Order's strengths had always been the finest handles by which to direct its downfall. Compassion made them hesitate. Principle made them predictable. Even their suspicion had boundaries. Release a summary, he said. State that the Fives incident remains classified due to ongoing concerns regarding clone morale and wartime operational security. Note that unrestricted discussion of unverified medical anomalies could destabilize frontline cohesion. Mace entered the instruction. And if they press, they will. Not yet aggressively. Windu is closer to alarm than Yoda, but Yoda prefers certainty. Kenobi is beginning to revisit old lies he once dismissed. Shakti is offended. Jocasta Nu is always offended. Palpatine allowed himself a small smile. Let them pull at threads. They will find them tied to committees, regulations, and frightened bureaucrats. It will exhaust them. Mace looked up from the pad. And Skywalker? At that, the smile warmed. Anakin is where he has always been, Palpatine said. At the point where fear and love become indistinguishable. He grows more difficult to read. No, Palpatine murmured. He grows more interesting. A chime sounded at the private access door. Speak of the Chosen One, Mace said, with the sort of humor that only functionaries risked in rooms where death was always technically available. Palpatine turned at last. Send him in. Mace bowed and moved aside as Anakin entered. Even before the door sealed, Palpatine felt the turmoil radiating from him, clean and bright and almost painful in its intensity. Such magnificent instability, still half mistaken by the Jedi for virtue simply because it took the shape of devotion. Anakin's clothes were civilian dark rather than military, but there was nothing soft in him. Lack of sleep ringed his eyes. His expression was controlled too carefully. "My dear boy," Palpatine said, stepping forward with outstretched warmth. "You look as if Forrest tried to kill you personally." Anakin inclined his head. "It tried. We objected." "No," Palpatine laughed. "Good. Come, sit." Mace withdrew without needing instruction. The guards at the outer chamber remained shadows. Palpatine gestured Anakin toward the low seating arrangement near the windows, rather than the more formal desk. A choice designed years ago, and now so habitual it required no conscious thought. Men confessed more easily from chairs that implied friendship. "You sent for me," Anakin said. "And you came? I'm touched." Palpatine settled opposite him. "How did the mission go?" "We recovered a courier. Lost 3 squadrons and a frigate escort. Took the relay core mostly intact." "Nah. Hardly worth the price, some would say." Anakin's mouth hardened. "The men who died might disagree." "Quite so." Palpatine spread his hands. "I only mean that victories seem increasingly expensive. The Council must feel it too." Anakin did not answer immediately. That alone was revealing. "They feel many things," he said at last. "Trust among them?" The young man's eyes flicked up. "What do you mean?" Palpatine lowered his voice, confiding rather than pressing. "You have given the Republic more than anyone of your age should have been asked to give. Yet the Masters still hold you at arm's length when decisions are made. They praise you as a hero before the public and question your judgment in private rooms. It is an old institutional habit. Organizations are seldom grateful to those whose gifts expose the limitations of their elders." "None." Anakin's jaw worked once. He looked away toward the city. Palpatine let the silence lengthen, gentle as a hand on a shoulder. Finally, Anakin said, "You don't know what they say in private rooms." "No," Palpatine replied softly. "I know only the expression of a young man treated as indispensable in battle and optional in council." That landed. Palpatine felt it. "The Jedi aren't politicians," Anakin said. Palpatine's smile held a trace of sadness. "My boy, they command armies." Anakin exhaled through his nose. "That doesn't mean they want power." "No, most institutions do not want power. They merely acquire it, defend it, and convince themselves their motives purify the result." The words slid into the room and remained there. Anakin did not accept them outright. Palpatine had never wanted him that simple. Better to offer thoughts like doors and let the boy discover he had already stepped through. "There are rumors in the Senate," Palpatine said after a moment, "that some among the Jedi are becoming uneasy with civilian oversight." "Rumors," Anakin repeated. "Yes, likely exaggerated." He leaned back, studying the younger man with benevolent concern. "But I would be blind not to notice the strain between us. I value the Order. I value you. If mistrust is growing, I would rather understand it than punish it." There. A lie wrapped inside apparent restraint. Anakin's stare sharpened. "Why bring me into that?" Because you move between worlds others keep separate. Palpatine's tone softened further. Because you are loyal to the Republic, and because you still care whether people in power deserve your loyalty. For a moment something almost boyish flickered in Anakin's face, the shock of being accurately seen. Or nearly accurately. Palpatine savored it. He shifted the subject by degrees, as he always did when laying the deeper hooks. There are traditions, he said, older than the Republic and older even than the modern Jedi Order. Ways of understanding the Force your masters would rather condemn than examine. Some of that caution is wise. Some of it is merely fear disguised as discipline. Nani? Anakin looked at him with sudden wariness. What kind of traditions? The kind that do not waste knowledge because it is uncomfortable. Palpatine let a thoughtful pause intervene. Have you ever considered that the greatest weakness of the Jedi may be moral vanity? That they believe refusing to study certain powers makes them pure, when in truth it only leaves them ignorant. Nani? Name Tao. Anakin's left hand, the metal one, flexed against the armrest. You're talking about the dark side. I'm talking about the Force in its entirety. Palpatine watched the tension rise, then added lightly, labels are often assigned by victors and priests. The dark side isn't a label. No? Palpatine asked. If a technique could save millions from war, would you reject it because the wrong people discovered it first? That depends on the technique. Does it? Palpatine's gaze held his. Or does it depend on who teaches it? Anakin stood abruptly, pacing to the window much as he had paced in Padmé's apartment the previous night. He stared down at the city, shoulders tight. Palpatine allowed the silence to open. It was one of his favorite tools. Few men could bear to feel watched in silence by someone older, warmer, and apparently unthreatened. At length Anakin said, without turning, "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because," Palpatine answered, "you are reaching the age when men begin to discover the difference between rules and wisdom. And because I suspect, however noble your intentions, that the Jedi have left you alone with questions they cannot answer." That did it. Palpatine felt the fear behind Anakin's restraint flicker brighter, still undefined but growing. He did not need details. Attachment always produced the same music when loss drew near. He rose and joined the young man by the window. Not too close. "There are abilities," he said, looking out over Corasont as though discussing weather, "that the Order would rather call unnatural than admit it never mastered. Legends speak of those who learn to influence life itself, to preserve it, to hold it back from the edge." Anakin turned. His face had gone very still. Palpatine smiled as if he regretted saying too much. Only legends, of course. Yet, sometimes legends are fragments of truths too dangerous to become respectable. When Anakin left a few minutes later, he did so with measured courtesy and a pulse loud enough in the Force to please any predator. After the door sealed, Masameda re-entered. "You pushed him?" "No," Palpatine said, returning to the windows. "I reminded him what he already fears, and if the Jedi are closer than we thought." Palpatine's expression did not change. "Then let them come closer. A man walking toward the edge can still be persuaded he is approaching rescue." 3 days later, Obi-Wan stood in the half-collapsed relay vault beneath the surface of Obadiah, and finally admitted to himself that coincidence had begun to feel like complicity. The Pike Moon smelled of dust, spice residue, and old accounting. Everything here had a price attached to it, including silence. Especially silence. The vault had been hidden beneath a freight exchange cut into the cliffside of a canyon city, protected by enough droids and syndicate gunmen to suggest the contents mattered more than the workers who had been slaughtered trying to erase them. Cody's troopers secured the upper corridors while Obi-Wan descended with a smaller team into the archive chamber at the heart of the complex. Now blaster smoke still lingered in the stone throat of the room. Burn marks climbed one wall. A shattered tactical table lay on its side near the entry. In the center, set into the floor, The relay core pulsed with intermittent blue light as Cody knelt beside it and rerouted its last protected feed through a portable Republic decoder. "Ready, General," Cody said. Obi-Wan crouched beside him. His robes were powdered with canyon dust, his forearm stinging from a glancing blaster hit he had not bothered to have treated yet. War taught one to triage pain according to whether it interfered with thought. The hollow ignited. Count Dooku appeared in pale distortion, elegant even in corruption, cape falling in severe folds from his shoulders. Age had sharpened rather than diminished him. There was still something heartbreakingly familiar in the line of his face, some remnant of the man Qui-Gon had once admired. That, Obi-Wan thought, might be the cruelest thing about treachery. It did not erase former virtues. It turned them into mockery. The figure answering Dooku stood hooded and obscured, voice lower in the modulation than the Forest relay, but no less careful. "The Senate Committee will extend the review," the hooded figure said. "Our ally within the executive will see to it." "And the Jedi?" Dooku asked. "They search where battle points them. Continue to give them battle." Dooku's mouth thinned with amusement. "Kenobi begins to remember what I told him on Geonosis." At that, Obi-Wan felt a strange chill in the warmth of the underground chamber. "It does not matter," the hooded figure said. "He is too honorable to accuse without proof, and the Order too entangled to move without consequence." The transmission skipped. When it resumed, Dooku was saying, "Kamino remains contained." "Good. The clone matter must not ripen before its season." Static tore through the projection. Then it died. Obi-Wan stayed motionless. Cody glanced up. "General?" It took Obi-Wan a moment to answer. "Play it again." They did. The same words. The same almost casual confidence in the behavior of the Jedi. The same reference to Geonosis. He remembered the cavern, the red stone, the chains biting his wrists while Dooku spoke with aristocratic patience of corruption at the heart of the Republic. The Senate is under the control of a Dark Lord of the Sith. Obi-Wan had dismissed it because he had needed to dismiss it. To accept that possibility then would have meant admitting the war had not merely been exploited by evil but architected by it from both ends. He had been younger in ways not measured by years. "General," Cody said again more quietly now, seeing that something in his commander's stillness was not tactical. Obi-Wan exhaled. "On Geonosis, Dooku told me a Sith controlled the Senate. I believed it propaganda." Cody looked at the dead hollow pedestal. "If there is someone in the executive aiding the Separatists, the Council needs more than a recording." "Yes," Obi-Wan said. "They do." He rose and moved toward the stacked data vaults along the far wall. Republic seals and Shell Corporation sigils glimmered side by side across the access ports. Their presence together would have been scandal enough if found by ordinary auditors. Here, in this place, the scandal seemed almost secondary to the intelligence value. Money braided both sides of the war. Logistics routes serving relief convoys also touched covert munitions depots. Reconstruction funds, emergency defense appropriations, security bonds, private contracts routed through neutral intermediaries, enough financial smoke to conceal entire armies. A trooper at the nearest vault called out, "We've got synchronized transfer orders, sir. Some of these originate from emergency authorizations issued on Corasont." "Whose office?" "Executive Allocation Bureau, Diah. Countersigned by Military Procurement." Monday. Obi-Wan crossed to him. The ledger on the cracked screen showed date chains aligned with major offensives, Senate reviews, security decrees. It was not proof of Palpatine's direct involvement. It was something perhaps worse in its ambiguity. Evidence that the machinery of the Republic had been threaded so thoroughly with hidden intent that either the Chancellor was blind inside his own government, or the blindness belonged to everyone else. Another trooper approached carrying a portable case. "Found this in the secondary vault. Secure biolock." Obi-Wan accepted it. The case was smaller than expected, heavy for its size, stamped with a faded medical insignia from Kamino beneath newer syndicate markings. He opened it carefully. Inside lay a data spindle and 2 preserved chip housings suspended in gel. For a moment, the chamber seemed to contract around him. Cody. The commander came at once. His eyes narrowed when he saw the contents. Those from the clone investigation? I would guess so. Why would the Pikes have them? Because someone paid them to store what could not safely remain elsewhere. Obi-Wan closed the case and felt the Force move through him in a low, warning current. Not vision, not certainty. Merely the unmistakable sense that the vault around them was not a discovery, but an afterimage. Whatever hand had arranged this network had already begun adjusting to the possibility of exposure. Transmit everything to the temple, he said. Encrypted at council level only. Yes, General. Cody hesitated before turning away. For what it's worth, sir, if someone in the executive is working with the Separatists, that doesn't mean the Republic belongs to them. Obi-Wan looked at him. The clone's expression remained steady, but there was an earnestness in it that would have startled many senators who thought clones too engineered for nuance. It means we stopped them, Cody finished. Something in Obi-Wan eased. Not his alarm. That remained. But some smaller despair yielded to the fact of this man standing in a dust-choked vault, prepared to follow truth even if truth reached back into the institution that had manufactured his own obedience. Yes, Obi-Wan said. It does. When they emerged onto the canyon ledge above the relay complex, dusk had fallen red across Diah. Gunships hovered between cliffs like patient insects, their lights strobed against drifting dust. The moon's cities gleamed in tiers of illicit wealth. Somewhere below, traders were already calculating what the day's raid would mean for tomorrow's prices. Obi-Wan paused before boarding the transport and looked up at the sky, where the first stars were appearing through haze. Dooku had known he would remember Geonosis eventually. The transmission made that plain. The hidden enemy had accounted for his conscience as one more predictable variable. That was the part that troubled him most. Not merely that someone at the center might be corrupt, but that whoever it was understood the Jedi intimately enough to manipulate their virtues into delay. As the gunship lifted toward orbit, the case containing the Kaminoan ship housing sat strapped beside him like a sleeping accusation. The council chamber felt smaller at night. Perhaps it was only the darkness pressed so insistently against the tall windows, turning the city outside into scattered wounds of light, and denying the room the illusion of spacious serenity. Or perhaps it was that every empty chair now carried the weight of a master absent at the front, reminding those present that the Order's mind was divided even when its authority pretended to be whole. Mace stood rather than sat. Yoda remained in his chair, hands folded over his cane. Obi-Wan, newly arrived from Obadiah, had not changed out of travel-stained robes. Shakti stood near one of the projection columns. Plo Koon, Ki-Adi-Mundi, and Stas Ali formed the rest of the gathered circle. The absence of others seemed louder than their presence. Obi-Wan's transmissions hovered above the central dais. The hooded message to Dooku, the finance chains, the Kaminoan case contents, the partial link to executive channels. Each time the projection of Dooku's face appeared, then dissolved, the room seemed to tighten around it. Ki-Adi-Mundi spoke first. This proves someone within the executive structure is compromised. It does not prove the Chancellor himself is our enemy. No, Mace said. But the range of possibilities has narrowed. Or widened, Stas Ali said quietly. If executive security, military procurement, and Kaminoan research are all touched, then we are dealing with a network, not merely a person. A network directed by someone, Shakti replied. Plo Koon's masked face turned toward the hovering audio fragment from Fives. The clone testimony troubles me more now than it did when first reported. If the implants were designed for more than aggression management, he let the thought hang unfinished. No one wished to give it words yet. Some possibilities did not strengthen by being spoken aloud. They simply made the room colder. Obi-Wan looked from one master to the next. Dooku expected I would remember Geonosis. That means the message was not only operational. It was psychological, whoever his master is, whoever their ally in the executive may be. They understand how we think. They rely upon our caution. Our caution protects the Republic from our fear, Ki-Adi-Mundi said. And if our caution becomes the means by which the Republic is delivered into a Sith hand? Mace asked. Silence. Yoda's eyes remained half-lidded, but everyone present felt the attention beneath that stillness. When he finally spoke, it was with the slow gravity that turned even small phrases into weights. 3 things know we now. Buried, something in the clones is. Touched by darkness, the war's design has been from the beginning, and closer than believed, to the Chancellor's machinery the trail runs. The machinery, Ki-Adi-Mundi repeated, seizing the distinction. Not the man? Yoda did not answer immediately. Sure, I am not. Mace began to pace the inner ring of the chamber. If we are wrong and move against Palpatine openly, the Senate fractures, the military panics, the Separatists exploit the chaos, and the Jedi become what our enemies already claim we are, generals attempting a political seizure. And if we are right and do nothing? Shakti asked. No fracture, Mace said. Only surrender. Slower, cleaner, legal. The word legal lingered with special bitterness. The Republic had developed an almost religious belief that procedure sanctified outcomes. Give a tyranny proper paperwork and most senators would call it regrettable but legitimate. Obi-Wan stopped the Dooku projection and turned toward Mace. There is another factor. Anakin, Mace said. It was not a question. Of course it was Anakin. Too many roads near the Chancellor eventually crossed the young man's life. Obi-Wan's expression tightened. Palpatine summons him often. If the Chancellor, or someone in his inner circle, is connected to this, Anakin is the closest thing we have to an unguarded witness. Then, Desha. Mace looked at the windows. Rain had returned, thinner now, needling the glass. He is also the closest thing Palpatine has to leverage inside the Order. Plo Koon's voice came low and warm through the mask. Skywalker is not a lever. No, Mace said. He is a person. That is why using him carelessly would be a mistake. A person the Chancellor has cultivated for years, Ki-Adi-Mundi countered. If we leave him blind, we risk losing our only vantage. Obi-Wan said. He is not blind. That drew several eyes toward him. He is angry, Obi-Wan continued. He is distrustful. He knows the Council does not always know what to do with him, but he is not blind. Mace heard the loyalty in that and respected it. Obi-Wan had earned the right to it. Yet he also knew love could obscure. Not always, not completely, but enough. Can he be trusted if Palpatine presses him between personal loyalty and duty? Ki-Adi-Mundi asked. Obi-Wan's gaze hardened. Yes. Can he be trusted? Mace said, overriding the coming argument. If we tell him only what he needs to know. That was the crueler question. And the necessary one. Yoda's ears angled slightly. Trust given in pieces is not trust. No, Mace said. But neither is burden. He stopped pacing. We will not accuse the Chancellor. Not yet. We will speak quietly with senators whose judgment we trust. Organa, Amidala, Mothma. We will review all executive access related to Kamino. We will determine who inside Palpatine's office handled the Fives case. And Skywalker will continue seeing the Chancellor as normal. Me. And, without being told why, Shakti asked. Mace met her eyes. He will be told enough to pay attention. She looked dissatisfied. So did Obi-Wan. So did, if Mace was honest, some part of himself. But Yoda inclined his head. Careful this path must be. The meeting, dissolved only after hours of dispute, refined themselves into temporary resolve. One by one the masters withdrew, robes whispering over polished floor, faces set in the brittle calm of beings who understood that every hour of hesitation might matter, and yet could not prove which hour would be the fatal one. Obi-Wan remained behind as Mace keyed the chamber doors into private mode. You think I'm wrong about him, Obi-Wan said. Mace did not pretend ignorance. I think you love him like a brother. Obi-Wan's mouth tightened with a pain so old it had become part of the architecture of his face. And you think that makes me unsound? I think it makes you human. That is not the criticism you seem to intend. Mace folded his arms. Skywalker is powerful, impulsive, secretive, and unusually attached to the Chancellor. All of those things are true. So is the fact that he has repeatedly chosen duty at great personal cost. I am trying to account for the whole man. Obi-Wan looked down, then back up. So am I. The chamber door whispered open behind them before either could say more. Anakin entered without ceremony, having clearly received some abbreviated summons from a temple courier. He wore training blacks now, not civilian clothes, and the transition between identities had done nothing to make him look younger. If anything, the severe simplicity made the strain in him more visible. "You wanted to see me," he said. Mace glanced at Obi-Wan, who offered the smallest nod. "Very well. There are irregularities in the executive channels related to the clone investigations," Mace said, "and evidence that someone within the Republic's upper political machinery is communicating with the Separatists." Anakin's eyes narrowed. "You think it's someone in the Chancellor's circle? We think you should pay careful attention when next you speak with him." Anakin went still enough that the air seemed to tighten around him. "That's all. For now." The silence that followed was harder than anger. It was heard in a colder form. "You need me close," Anakin said. "But not close enough to trust." Mace kept his voice measured. "I need you observant. And if I ask what exactly I'm observing for? Anything that touches Kamino, the Senate security measures, any unusual interest in Jedi deployments or the clone investigations." Anakin laughed once, low and incredulous. "You've already decided I'm useful." Mace felt Obi-Wan tense beside him. "Useful," Mace said, "is not the word I would choose." "No?" Anakin's stare flashed. "Then what would you call being sent into a conversation everyone else is too afraid to have?" Mace took one step closer. "I would call it responsibility." "Responsibility," Anakin repeated, "is what the Council says when it wants obedience dressed as trust." Obi-Wan intervened then, voice quiet. "Anakin, Darth." But the young man's gaze remained on Mace. The older master saw, all at once, what so many others missed under the fame and recklessness and impossible power. Not arrogance, not primarily, but hunger. A lifelong hunger to be claimed fully by some authority he could respect without reservation. The Order had never managed it. Palpatine, Mace realized, had likely understood that from the beginning. "This is not punishment," Mace said. "No," Anakin answered. "It never is." He turned and left before dismissal. When the doors sealed again, the chamber seemed emptier than before. Obi-Wan looked stricken and angry in equal measure. "That was poorly done." "Probably," Mace said. "Then why do it?" Mace faced the storm beyond the glass. "Because if Palpatine is what I fear, Skywalker is already in the center of it. I would rather wound his pride tonight than lose him entirely tomorrow." The apartment was dark except for the city. Padmé liked it that way when he came late. The low lights inside turned the rooms intimate, almost secret from themselves, while the vast glow beyond the balcony made it feel as if they were suspended over a sea of molten stars. Anakin stood by the open doors with his cloak half undone, and his thoughts still full of the temple, of Mace's hard voice and Obi-Wan's troubled silence, and the growing sense that every institution in his life wanted some loyal part of him while distrusting the rest. Padmé crossed the room in a pale gown that caught the ambient light like water. She had dismissed the staff hours earlier. No witnesses. No risk of a servant's glance lingering too long on the wrong tenderness. There were evenings when secrecy made their marriage feel sharpened and precious. Tonight, it only felt old. "You're carrying the Council with you," she said softly. He looked up. "What?" "In your face." She touched his cheek. "Come outside." They stepped onto the balcony. Wind moved around them, cool from the recent rain, carrying the faint metallic scent of the city after storms. Traffic hissed far below. Somewhere across the district, a transport beacon pulsed red at slow intervals, like a patient heart. Padmé rested both hands on the railing for a moment and looked out over Corasont. "When I first came here as queen," she said, "I thought the capital looked immortal. It still does. That's because height makes people mistake themselves for permanence." She turned back toward him. Whatever she had meant to say next changed when she saw him fully. The lines at the corners of his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way fear was learning, more and more often, to wear the face of determination. "Anakin," she said, and there was such gentleness in it that he felt himself brace against whatever blow tenderness was preparing. She took his hand, his real hand first, as she always did when she wanted him unguarded, and placed it against her stomach. For an instant, he did not understand. Then he did. The whole city seemed to drop away. He stared at her. The balcony, the wind, the traffic lanes, the war. Everything went soundless and impossibly clear at once. "Padmé," he whispered. Her smile trembled despite herself. "I'm pregnant." Joy hit him first, fierce and pure and overwhelming enough to make him laugh from sheer disbelief. He gathered her to him so quickly she let out a breathless sound halfway between laughter and tears, and then he was kissing her face, her hair, her mouth, his hands trembling on her as though he had been given something too miraculous to survive holding. A child. His child. Their child. Life rushing toward them out of secrecy and love and impossible defiance. For a few radiant heartbeats there was no fear in it at all. Only wonder. Only the wild, stunned gratitude of a man who had spent so much of his life being told what could not belong to him that belonging itself arrived like a holy violation. Then fear came. It entered not as contradiction but as shadow following light. So immediate, so intimate, that he almost hated himself for it. He saw a tiny hand. He saw blood. He saw his mother dying in the sand on Tatooine, her body too light in his arms. He saw war taking everything tender and making it into leverage. He saw loss before he had even learned the shape of what he might lose. Padmé must have felt the change in him. She pulled back just enough to search his face. "What is it?" He tried to smile. "Manage something broken." "Nothing." "That is a terrible lie." He exhaled shakily and rested his forehead against hers. "I'm happy," he said. "I am. More than happy. I just..." He could not say it. Not yet. To speak fear aloud was to invite it closer. He knew that was superstition and could not stop believing it. Padmé touched the scar at his temple with 2 fingers, a gesture so familiar it undid him anew. "You think joy is a debt the world will collect." He let out a breath that might have been a laugh in kinder times. "You always make it sound prettier. That doesn't make it less true." He opened his eyes. Her face was luminous in the city glow, strong and tired and utterly beloved. Senator Dot. Queen. Conspirator. Wife. Mother. Diah. The last word stunned him every time it crossed his mind, as though the galaxy had become too full for language. "Are you afraid?" he asked. "Yes," she said at once. "And happy. And furious that I have to feel those things at the same time." "Nunga. He smiled despite himself. "That sounds like you. It sounds like us." She drew him toward the settee by the balcony doors and made him sit. For a while they spoke quietly, the way people do when wonder has made them reverent. Names came up and were abandoned. Futures were imagined and then laughed at for their impossibility. Naboo in peacetime. A garden. An ordinary house with too much sun. Children running where no one was saluting anyone. The vision was so tender it hurt. Then silence fell, and into that silence dropped the heavier things. "What happens if the war doesn't end soon?" Padmé asked. "It will." That wasn't an answer. He looked down at their joined hands. Metal and skin. Promise and weapon. "I'll make it end if I have to." Anakin Toti. He heard the warning in her voice, and hated that he already knew she was right to give it. Making things end was the logic of soldiers and tyrants. The trouble was that war taught you to admire decisive men. She moved closer, turning his face back toward hers. Whatever is happening in the Senate, whatever the Council is asking of you, promise me one thing. If I can, don't let him become the measure of what you're willing to do. He knew at once whom she meant. Padmé. No? Listen to me. Her eyes held his with a steadiness that made evasion impossible. Power is not the same as wisdom. Need is not the same as trust. You know that. Somewhere beneath all the fear, you know that. He wanted to tell her about the Chancellor's hints, about legends of preserving life, about how every word now struck the newly exposed nerve of fatherhood. He wanted to confess that since she had placed his hand on her stomach, the galaxy itself seemed reorganized around one unbearable fact. He could not protect her by being brave alone. Instead, he said, I don't know what he is anymore. That was more honesty than he had planned to offer. It startled them both. Padmé studied him, then find out quickly. He kissed her again because there was nothing else to do with the ache. Much later, when she had fallen asleep curled against him and Corasont had descended into its false midnight hush, Anakin lay awake, listening to the rain begin again. His hand rested lightly over the curve of her abdomen as though he might already feel the future there if he concentrated hard enough. Across the city, in chambers lined with red and gold, Palpatine spoke by a secure holo to Count Dooku and General Grievous. The images of the two Separatist leaders hovered above a dark table like summoned ghosts. Dooku's expression was cool, contemptuous, alert. Grievous's mechanical body hunched around hatred with almost admirable honesty. The Outer Rim sieges must intensify, Palpatine said. Strike humanitarian convoys. Not enough to cripple relief. Enough to provoke outrage. Force more security concessions through the Senate. Nay, nah. Grievous' voice scraped like broken steel. Your politicians will wring their hands while my fleets take worlds. My politicians, Palpatine said mildly, will do what I have trained them to do. You will do what I allow you to do. Dooku watched from within his blue flame. The Jedi are uneasy. Kenobi retrieved a relay on Obadiah. Yes, you sound unconcerned. I sound, Palpatine replied, like a man who expected competence eventually. Let them become uneasy. Suspicion without proof exhausts better beings than fear. Nutty. Dooku's lip curled faintly. And Skywalker? The old man smiled then, a private expression almost fond. Skywalker has been given something to lose. The hollow cut. Palpatine remained alone with the storm and the city. He could feel Anakin at a distance. Bright with love. Torn with dread. Newly vulnerable in precisely the direction required. The young never understood how often the great choices of history were made not by ideology, but by terror at a bedside. At the temple, Yoda walked the midnight garden beneath dripping eaves and listened to the rain strike leaves brought from 10,000 worlds. The force around the capital trembled with converging lines. A child not yet born glowed faintly at the edge of perception. A dark will smiled behind windows. A young man loved too much and understood too little about the forms fear could wear when dressed as salvation. Yoda closed his eyes. Close, he whispered to the dark. Too close, all of this is. The invitation arrived at dusk. A private seat at the galaxy's opera house. Attendance requested by the Chancellor. Discretion appreciated. Anakin almost refused. The Council's suspicion sat in him like grit. Padmé's warning remained fresh enough to sting. The news of her pregnancy had transformed every suggestion of power into something more dangerous, because now every promise brushed against a fear he could not admit. But refusal would have been conspicuous, and some part of him, honest enough to be ashamed, wanted to hear what Palpatine would say next. The opera house rose from the entertainment district like a pearl set in black metal. Inside, light moved over curved walls in soft aquatic tones, and the audience drifted through the galleries in jeweled silence, Senators and magnates and military dignitaries, dressed as though the galaxy were not on fire beyond the district shields. Wealth always cultivated its own weather. Palpatine greeted Anakin in a private box high above the main chamber. He wore dark, formal robes that made his face look almost spectral in the low blue light. Below them, the stage was a vast pool of darkness from which luminous forms slowly emerged. Translucent creatures unfolding like living glass. Voices rising from the orchestra pit in tones so mournful, they seemed to bypass hearing and settle directly into bone. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Palpatine said as Anakin took the seat beside him. "It's something." Palpatine smiled. "A military review from you." The performance moved in patterns difficult to interpret. Figures rose, merged, vanished, reappeared as larger versions of themselves. Dancers in mirrored masks stepped over submerged platforms, while hidden projectors cast entire worlds blooming and dying across curtains of mist. It should have been pretentious. Instead, it was strangely hypnotic, like dreaming with one eye open. For several minutes, Palpatine said nothing. He let the music and the darkness and the unnatural serenity of the place work upon Anakin's strained mind. The younger man watched the stage, but not, Palpatine suspected, with any real attention. His thoughts were elsewhere. Good. At last, Palpatine leaned slightly closer. "Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis?" Anakin turned, frowning. "No, I thought not. The Jedi do not favor histories in which their monopoly on wisdom appears less than absolute." The old man's voice moved almost beneath the music, intimate without being hurried. He told the story not as a lecture, but as though unsealing a private inheritance. A Sith Lord so powerful and so knowledgeable that he learned to influence life itself, to create, to preserve, to hold death at bay for those he wished to keep. A master who feared losing his power only after mastering nearly everything else. A pupil who waited, learned, and struck when certainty softened into complacency. On the stage below, a luminous figure descended into black water and rose again crowned in light. Anakin barely saw it. "Is this a true story?" he asked. Palpatine's smile was almost indulgent. "Truth is rarely pure in old teachings, especially when the surviving teachers prefer certain facts buried." "Nani? And why would the Jedi bury it?" "Because what they call unnatural is often merely what they failed to control." Anakin looked back toward the stage. His pulse had quickened. He knew it. Palpatine knew it. The knowledge sat between them like a third presence. "This is a Sith legend," Anakin said. "From a certain point of view. There was humor there, but beneath it lay something else now. Something no longer comfortably deniable." "Why tell me?" Anakin asked. Palpatine watched the moving light play across his young face. So much hunger, so much dread, so much thwarted grandeur straining against a conscience taught mostly in negatives. "Because," Palpatine said, "you are beginning to understand that good men die every day while institutions debate whether saving them would be proper. Because you are gifted enough to ask questions your masters fear. Because one day you may have to decide whether preserving life matters more than obeying doctrine." Anakin's metal hand tightened on the armrest. "The dark side corrupts. Power reveals," Palpatine corrected softly. "It makes visible what was always present. A selfish man becomes monstrous. A compassionate man becomes dangerous to those who profit from suffering." "Dani." The music swelled below them, strings climbing towards something almost unbearable. Anakin felt suddenly as if the room had lost air. He thought of Padmé asleep beneath city light, of the child, of visions he had not yet fully begun to have, but could feel gathering somewhere beyond the edge of thought like storm clouds over a dry plain. "You talk about this as if you know it," he said. Palpatine turned his head. Their eyes met fully at last. In the shifting blue and silver light, the Chancellor's face looked older than usual and younger too. The softness stripped away until only precision remained. "Some knowledge," he said, "cannot be discussed by men who only approve of knowledge already sanctioned. That isn't an answer. No. The smile returned, smaller now. It isn't. A messenger entered at the rear of the box and bowed low, offering a sealed data strip. Palpatine accepted it with visible annoyance at the interruption, scanned the contents, then dismissed the aide. What is it? Anakin asked before he could stop himself. Administrative tedium. Palpatine slipped the strip into his sleeve. Senate inquiries. Kamino. The usual anxious rustling. Anakin's stare sharpened. Kamino. Yes. Palpatine sounded bored. One clone loses his mind, and suddenly every bureaucrat desires expertise in neurochemistry. How do you know about that inquiry? Palpatine turned back to the stage. My dear boy, I am the Chancellor. People trouble me with everything. The answer was reasonable. Too reasonable. That was the problem with Palpatine. Every explanation fit until it began fitting too well. On stage, one of the luminous performers broke apart into a cloud of fireflies that drifted upward into darkness. Palpatine spoke again, quieter now, as though continuing an entirely separate conversation. The Sith and the Jedi are more alike than either would admit. Both seek order in the Force. Both elevate discipline. Both produce men convinced their suffering has made them necessary. Anakin felt cold despite the warmth of the private box. You keep saying Sith. Palpatine's eyes remained on the stage. Words only frighten those who mistake naming for understanding. Do you know the Sith? At that, the old man finally looked at him. There was no deflection in the gaze, no kindly avuncular softness, only patient appraisal and a strange, almost paternal sorrow. Better than the Jedi do, he said. The world seemed to constrict around that answer. Anakin heard the orchestra as a long metallic ringing. He heard his own pulse. He heard Padmé laughing on Naboo years ago before war had remade their faces. He saw, superimposed over everything, his mother dying in his arms and the memory of helplessness opening like a wound. Palpatine leaned closer, voice scarcely above breath. There are ways to prevent those we love from being taken from us. The words entered Anakin like poison and medicine at once. He stood abruptly. Nearby spectators in adjacent boxes glanced over, curious at the movement, then tactfully away. In the shadowed privacy of the chamber, Palpatine remained seated. You should sit, the Chancellor said softly. The third movement is extraordinary. Anakin stared at him. What are you saying? I am saying, Palpatine replied, every syllable precise, that if one is willing to learn, many things the Jedi call impossible become merely difficult. Anakin's hand hovered near his saber without fully touching it. He was not even conscious of the gesture until Palpatine's gaze flicked to it and back. No alarm. No guards rushing in. Only that infuriating calm, as though the old man had always known this was where the evening would arrive. You're afraid, Palpatine said, and for the first time there was no kindness left in the observation. Only certainty. Not of me. Of losing someone. I can help you with that if you have the courage to want help more than permission. Anakin left without remembering the corridor. He only knew afterward that he had walked the long descending galleries of the opera house, in a daze while masked patrons drifted around him like ghosts. Outside, the night air struck him hard enough to feel like a blow. Traffic lights smeared across wet pavement. Sirens pulsed somewhere below the entertainment level. Corasont kept moving, obscene in its indifference. He stood beneath the opera house arch and realized his hands were shaking. Palpatine knew. About fear, if not yet the details. About Kamino. About the Sith with an intimacy no merely educated politician could counterfeit. About the exact pressure points where love became leverage. He also knew, with a horror that was almost admiration, that the old man had let him leave, because he expected him to come back. Before dawn he dreamt Padmé was dying. In the dream she stood in white on a shore that might have been Naboo, and might have been no place that existed, one hand pressed to her belly, the other reaching toward him through a wind that kept lengthening the distance. He ran, but the shore became corridors, then a medical ward, then the sands of Tatooine. His mother lay where Padmé should have been. Padmé lay where his mother had died. A child cried somewhere he could not reach. Behind them all, a dark figure watched from the threshold with patient amusement, while machines counted down toward a loss they had already accepted. He woke with a strangled breath, and the sheets twisted around his legs. The room in Padmé's apartment was gray with first light. She slept beside him, one hand tucked under her cheek, face soft in a way daylight rarely allowed the public to see. Alive, entire, beautiful enough to make gratitude feel violent. He sat up slowly, every muscle taut. Dream, he told himself. Only dream. But the word only had never meant much in his life where the Force was concerned. He knew the difference between nightmares born of strain and those that arrived carrying the cold authority of warning. This had tasted too much like the latter. Padmé stirred as he rose. "Anakin?" He crossed back to the bed at once and knelt beside her. "Go back to sleep." She pushed herself up on one elbow and studied his face. "You saw something." He looked away. "That means yes." He took her hand and kissed the inside of her wrist. "I have to go to the temple." Because of the dream, or because of him? The fact that she no longer had to specify which him made something inside Anakin curdle. "Both," he admitted. She sat fully upright now, the sheets gathered around her, hair falling loose over one shoulder. There was no vanity in her concern, only naked intelligence sharpened by love. "Tell me what happened." So he told her. Not everything. Not the most poisonous detail about preventing death. Not the full extent of how the words had burrowed into his fear. But enough. The opera. The story. The way Palpatine spoke of the Sith as knowledge rather than enemy. The mention of Kamino. The confidence. The invitation hidden inside the warning. Padmé listened without interrupting. By the end, her face had gone pale. "He knows too much," she said. "Yes. And you think?" "I think he's connected." The words felt inadequate. Childish in the face of what they suggested. Maybe more than connected. Padmé took a slow breath. "Then you have to tell them." He heard the them and almost winced. "Tell the Council. Tell Mace. Tell the institution that had doubted him and needed him in equal measure. Tell Obi-Wan that the man Anakin had defended for years might be the hidden corruption under everything. Tell the Jedi before fear grew persuasive." "I know," he said. She touched his cheek. "Promise me you won't go back to him alone." He closed his hand over hers. "I promise." When he left the apartment, the city was still silver with rain. Dawn over Corasont always felt artificial to him, as though daylight here had to fight through too many layers of architecture and ambition before it could qualify as morning. His speeder cut through half-empty traffic lanes toward the temple while the dream clung to him like a second skin. At the temple, Mace was already awake. He had not slept. No one would have needed the Force to know it. The signs were there in the unchanging set of his shoulders, in the way he stood at the chamber table as though any relaxation might qualify as surrender, in the two untouched cups of tea cooling near the edge of the console. Yoda sat farther back in shadow, motionless enough to resemble carved age rather than living one. On the holotable between them floated fresh Senate feeds and a message from Bail Organa warning that the Chancellor intended to introduce another security revision by afternoon. One that would place elements of Jedi deployment oversight under executive wartime review. "He is preparing to isolate us," Mace said as the feed ended. "Or to protect himself," Yoda murmured. Mace keyed the Senate report closed. Same outcome. A temple aide entered then, bowed and said, "General Skywalker requests immediate audience." Mace and Yoda exchanged one swift look. "Send him." Anakin came in damp from the morning air, cloak unfastened, eyes hollowed by no sleep and too much revelation. He did not bow. He did not waste breath on formality. Mace respected him for that more than he would ever say. "What happened?" Mace asked. Anakin stopped several paces from the table. For a heartbeat he seemed unable to find language that could hold what he had come to carry. Then he did what truly frightened men sometimes do when fear has finally become simpler than concealment. "The Chancellor knows things he shouldn't," he said. "About Kamino. About the Sith. About powers the Jedi don't teach." Mace took one step closer. "Explain." Anakin did, roughly, quickly, with none of his usual defensiveness left to shield the telling. He recounted the Opera House, the story of Darth Plagueis, the comments about preserving life, the intimate familiarity with Sith knowledge, the mention of Kamino inquiries. As he spoke, Mace watched not merely the words but the shape of the man delivering them. No performance, no attempt to manipulate, only alarm, revulsion, and beneath them both the ache of personal betrayal. When Anakin finished, silence filled the chamber. Yoda's face had gone very still. Mace felt something inside his own mind click into place with the terrible finality of a lock engaging. Ducas old claim. Sifo Dias. Kamino erased. 5 silenced through executive channels. A war designed to strengthen the Republic's central authority, while feeding its enemy through the same hidden hand. Palpatine gathering emergency powers, shaping Senate fear, cultivating Anakin for years, speaking now of Sith teachings with proprietary ease. The trail had not merely led to the Chancellor's office. It had worn the carpet there. "You believe," Mace said, though by then he knew the answer, "that Palpatine is the Sith we have been seeking." Anakin swallowed. "Yes." The word hung in the room like a blade. Mace turned away, not because he doubted Anakin, but because the full implications required a breath of private stillness. The Republic then was not endangered by infiltration. It had already been occupied at the heart. Every law passed in fear, every battle prolonged for advantage, every clone order buried beneath classified seals. It had all happened under the smiling hand of the man senators thanked for his sacrifice. He felt anger then. Clean, fierce-souled. Not reckless anger. Not the hot, splintering rage he had spent a lifetime mastering. This was colder. The anger of understanding too late that one had been invited, politely, to oversee one's own defeat. Behind him, Yoda said, "If true this is, grave beyond measure our danger has become." Mace faced Anakin again. The young man looked braced for condemnation, perhaps for disbelief. Instead, Mace saw only a Jedi who had chosen, at the critical edge, to bring truth where temptation had expected secrecy. "Why tell us now?" Mace asked, wanting the answer from Anakin's own mouth. Pain moved across the younger man's face. "Because whatever he's offering, whatever he knows, it's wrong. And because if I waited any longer, I think that would matter. Honesty. Brutal and incomplete, therefore trustworthy." Mace inclined his head once. It was not forgiveness for all their years of friction. It was something sterner and perhaps more meaningful. "You did the right thing." Anakin stared at him as if the words themselves were unfamiliar. Mace turned to the comm console. "Summon the available masters. Secure internal channels only. No Senate contact beyond Organa and Amidala. Temple guards to readiness, but quiet readiness. I want no panic." The aide at the door paled and hurried off. Anakin took a step forward. "What are you going to do?" The chamber seemed to draw its own breath. "What, indeed? Arrest the Chancellor? Move against the most popular man in the Republic while war still raged and clone armies awaited orders through channels tainted by secrets from Kamino? Sit and deliberate longer while the Sith consolidated control? There had been a time for caution. Perhaps that time was already gone. Mace looked at Anakin and saw how near the precipice the boy, no, the man, had come. A different word from Palpatine. A different grievance nurtured at the right hour. A different degree of distrust from the Council. History might have taken a darker road before breakfast. "We are going to verify the last doubt," Mace said. "And then we are going to end this." Anakin's hand moved unconsciously to his lightsaber. "I should come with you." "No." The refusal struck hard, but Mace held it. Not out of disdain. Out of strategy, and something like mercy. "He trusts you," Mace said. He may still try to use that. If we confront him, I need at least one thing outside his calculations. I'm not outside anything anymore. No, Mace said quietly. Which is why you will stay where the temple can protect your judgment while this begins. Anakin's anger flared at once. Mace saw it, expected it, and did not yield. Some arguments were merely the pain of a man being kept from the fire he himself had spotted. Yoda spoke before Anakin could. Patience, Skywalker. Anakin laughed bitterly. That's what everyone says right before everything gets worse. Yoda's gaze did not waver. This time, worse already it is. The truth of that fell between them all. Anakin looked away first. Mace stepped closer until only a pace separated them. Hear me, he said. Whatever happens next, what you did here matters. You chose the Order over seduction, the Republic over fear. Hold to that choice. Nah. Something in Anakin's face shifted. Not softened, not quite, but steadied. As though a beam under too much strain had at last found one more support. Outside, thunder rolled again over Corasont. Dawn had fully broken now, pale and merciless through the high windows. The city below resumed its daily pretense that power and order were the same thing. Temple alarms did not sound. No public call went out. No senators yet knew that the truth had risen at the center of the storm. But within the old stone, decisions were beginning to move with irreversible weight. Anakin stood very still in the chamber while Mace issued the first commands. Yoda closed his eyes, listening perhaps to the Force, perhaps to all the futures collapsing and reshaping under the pressure of this hour. Couriers hurried through the corridors. Guards changed posture. Somewhere far above, rain struck the temple's spires and ran down the carved faces of ancient Jedi, who had believed in their own eras that darkness always announced itself from beyond the walls. Mace Windu looked out once more toward the Senate district. The executive tower shone through the weather, bright and impeccable, a monument to legitimacy. At last, the darkness had a location. Not on some hidden world. Not in a forgotten tomb. Not on the fringes of civilization. It sat at the center of the Republic, in the highest office on Coruscant, wearing a tired old man's smile and calling itself peace.